Good morning. Page 385, Chapter 4, Part 6, Vol.3, Nations in Exile. Historians may correct us, but no instance from the 19th century or the 18th or the 17th of forcible resettlement of whole peoples has lodged in the average man's memory. There were colonial conquests on the South Sea islands, in Africa, in Asia, in the Caucasus. The conquerors obtained power over the indigenous population, but somehow it did not enter the immature minds of the colonizers to sever the natives from the land which had been theirs full from their ancestral homes. Only the export of Negroes to the American plantation gives us perhaps some semblance, some anticipation of it. But there was no developed state system at work here, only individual Christian slave traders, in whose breasts the sudden revelation of huge gains lit a roaring fire of greed, so that they rushed to hunt down, to inveigle, to buy Negroes, singly or by the dozen, each on his own account. Only the 20th century, on which all civilized mankind has put its hopes, arrived only when the national question had reached the summit of its development, thanks to the one and only true doctrine. Could the supreme authority on that question patent the wholesome expiration of peoples by banishment within 48 hours, within 24 hours, or even within an hour and a half? Even to him, of course, the answer did not become quite clear quite so suddenly. He once even committed himself to the incautious view that there never has been and never can be an instance of anyone in the USSR becoming an object of persecution because of his national origin. In the 20s, all those minority languages were encouraged. It was endlessly dinned into the Crimea that it was Tatar, Tatar, and nothing but Tatar. It even had the Arabic alphabet, and all the signs were in Tatar. Then it turned out that this was all a mistake. Even when he had finished compressing the exiled peasant mass, the great helmsman did not immediately realize how conveniently this method could be applied to nations. His sovereign brother, Hitler's experiments with the extirpation of Jews and Gypsies came late, when the Second World War had already begun. But Father Stalin had not given thought to the problem earlier. After the peasant plague, and until the banishment of the peoples of the land of exile the land of exile could not begin to compare with the camps. Although it handled hundreds of thousands, it was not so glorious and populous that the high road of history lay through it. There were exiled settlers sentenced by the courts, and there were administrative exiles untried. But both these groups consisted of persons individually registered, each with his own name, year of birth, articles of indictment, photographs, full face and in profile, and only the organs, with their miraculous patience and their readiness for anything, could weave a rope from these particles of sand, build a monolith colony in each of their districts from the wreckage of so many families. The business of banishment was immeasurably improved and speeded up when they drove the first special settlers into exile. The two earlier terms, exile settler and administrative exile, were from the Tsar's times, but the Spetsperesielnitz, the special settler, was Soviet, our very own Spets. So many of our favorite, our most precious words begin with this little prefix, special section, special assignment, special communication system, special rations, special sanatorium. In the year of the Great Break, they designated the dekulagized as special settlers, and this made for much greater flexibility and efficiency. It left no grounds for appeal, since it was not only kulaks who were dekulagized. Call them special settlers, and no one can wriggle free. Then the Great Father gave orders that this word would be applied to banished nations. Even he was slow to realize the value of his discovery. His first experiment was very cautious. In 1937, some tens of thousands of those suspicious Koreans with Kim Gaul in mind, face to face with Japanese imperialism, who could trust those slant-eyed heathens? From palsied old men to puling infants, with some portion of their beggarly belongings, were swiftly and quietly transferred from the far east to Kazakhstan, so swiftly that they spent the first winter in mud brick houses without windows. Where would all that glass have come from? And so quietly that nobody except the neighboring Kazakhs learned of this resettlement. No one who counted let a word slip about it. No foreign correspondent uttered a squeak. Now you can see why the whole press must be in the hands of the proletariat. He liked it. He remembered it. And in 1940, the same method was applied to the outskirts of Leningrad, cradle of the revolution. But this time the banished were not taken at night and at bayonet point. Instead, it was called a triumphal send-off. The newly conquered Karelo-Finnish Republic. At high noon, with red flags flapping and brass bands playing, the Leningrad Finns and Estonians were dispatched to settle their new native soil. Where they had been taken a bit further from civilization, VAM tells us what befell a party of some 600. They were all relieved of their passports, put under guard, and carried forward, first in red prison boxcars, then by barge. At the harbor of their destination, deep in Karelia, they were broken up into small groups and sent to reinforce the collective arms. And these completely free citizens, fresh from their triumphant send-off, submitted. Only 26 rebels, our narrator among them, refused to go, and what is more, would not surrender their passports. A representative of Soviet power, in this case the Council of People's Commissars of the Karelo-Finnish Republic, had also arrived, and he warned them, "There will be casualties. Will you turn machine guns on us?" They shouted back, "Silly fellows, why machine guns?" There they were, surrounded by guards, all in a bunch. A single barrel would have been enough for them, and nobody would have written poems about those 26 Finns. But a strangely spineless sluggishness or reluctance to take responsibility prevented the carrying out of this sensible measure. In an attempt to separate them, they were told to report to the security officers singly, but all 26 answered the summons together, and their senseless obstinacy and courage prevailed. They were allowed to keep their passports, and the cordon was removed. In this way, they resisted falling to the level of collective farmers or exiles. But theirs was an exceptional case, and the great majority handed over their passports. These were mere trial runs. Only in July 1941 did the time come to test the method at full power, the autonomous and, of course, traitorous Republic of the Volga Germans, with its twin capitals, Engels and Markstadt, and had to be expunged of its population, hurled somewhere well to the east in a matter of days. Here, for the first time, the dynamic method of exiling whole peoples was applied in all its purity, and how much easier, how much more rewarding it proved to use a single criterion, that of nationality, rather than all those individual interrogations and decrees each naming a single person. As for the Germans seized in other parts of Russia, and every last one was gathered in, local NKVD officers had no need of higher education to determine whether a man was an enemy or not. If the name's German, grab him. The system had been proved and perfected, and henceforward would fasten its pitiless talons on any nation pointed out to it, designated and doomed as treacherous, and more adroitly every time. The Chechens, the English, the Karachi, the Bulgars, the Kalmyks, the Kurds, the Crimean Tatars, and finally the Caucasian Greeks. What made the system particularly effective was that the decision taken by the father of the peoples was made known to a particular people not in form of verbose legal proceedings, but by means of a military operation carried out by modern motorized infantry. Armed divisions entered the doomed people's locality by night and to occupy key positions. The criminal nation wakes up and sees every settlement ringed with machine guns and automatic rifles, and they are given 12 hours. But that is a long time for the wheels of motorized infantry units to stop turning, and in the Crimea, it was sometimes only 2 or even 1.5 hours to get ready to whatever each of them can carry in his hands. Then each of them is made to sit cross-legged in the back of a lorry, like a prisoner. Old women, mothers, and babies at the breast. Sit down, all of you, you heard the order, and the lorries traveled under escort to the railway station. From there, prison trains take them to a new place, from which they may still have to make their way, like Volga boatmen, as the Crimean Tatars did up the river Unja. What more suitable place for them than those northern marshes, towing rafts on which grey-bearded old men lie motionless 150 to 200 kilometers against the current into the wild forest above Gulag. From the air, or from high up in the mountains, it was probably a magnificent sight. The whole Crimean Peninsula, newly liberated in April 1944, echoed with the hum of engines and hundreds of motorized columns crawling, snake-like, on and on along roads straight and crooked. The trees weren't just in full bloom. Tatar women were lugging boxes of spring onions from hothouses to bed them out in the garden. The tobacco planting was just beginning, and there was where it ended. Tobacco vanished from the Crimea for many years to come. The motorized columns did not go right up into the settlements, but stayed at the road junctions, while the detachments of special troops encircled villages. Their orders were to allow the inhabitants an hour and a half to get ready, but political officers cut this down, sometimes to as little as 40 minutes, to get it over with more quickly and be on time at the assembly point, and so that richer picking would be lying around for the detachment of the task force to be left behind in the village. Hardened villages like Ozenbash near Lake Biuk had to be burned to the ground. The motorized columns took the Tatars to the station, and there they went on waiting in their trains for days on end, wailing and singing mournful songs of farewell. Neatness and uniformity. That is the advantage of exiling whole nations at once. No special cases, no exceptions, no individual protests. They all go quietly because they're all in it together. All ages and both sexes go, and that still leaves something to be said. Still, those still in the womb go too, and are exiled unborn by the same decree. Yes, children not yet conceived go into exile, for it is their lot to be conceived under the high hand of the same decree, and from the very day of their birth, whatever that obsolete and tiresome Article 35 of the Criminal Code may say, sentence of exile cannot be passed on persons under 16 years of age, From the moment they thrust their heads out into the light, they will be special settlers, exiles in perpetuity. Their coming of age, their 16th birthdays, will be marked only by the first of their regular outings to report at the MBD post. All that exiles have left behind them, their houses wide open and still warm, their belongings lying in disorder. The home put together and improved by 10 or even 20 generations passes without differentiation to the agents of the punitive organ, then some of it to the state, some to neighbors belonging to more fortunate nations, and nobody will write or complain about the loss of a cow, a piece of furniture, or some crockery. One final thing made the principle of uniformity absolute, raised it to the height of perfection. The secret decree did not spare even members of the Communist Party in the ranks of these worthless nations. No need to check party cards. Another relief. Besides, the Communists could make it work twice as hard. Could be made to work twice as hard as the rest of their new place of exile, and everybody would be satisfied. The only crack in the principle of uniformity was made by mixed marriages. Not for nothing has our socialist state always been against them. When the Germans and later the Greeks were exiled, spouses belonging to other nationalities were not sent with them. This caused a great deal of confusion and left the foci of infection in places supposedly sterilized, like those old Greek women who came home to their children to die. Where were the exiled nations sent? Kazakhstan was much favored, and there, together with the ordinary exiles, they formed more than half the republic's population, so that it could be aptly called Kazakhstan. But in Central Asia, Siberia, where very many Kalmyks perished along the Yenisei, the northern Urals and the northern European areas of the USSR all received their fair share. Should we, or should we not, regard the expulsions from the Baltic states as deportation of nations? Do they not satisfy the formal requirements? The Balts were not deported wholesale. As nations, they appeared to remain in their old homes. It would have been so nice to move them all. But they were a little too close. They were a little too close to Europe. They appeared to be where they had been, but they were thinned out. Their best people were removed. The purge started early, back in 1940, as soon as our troops marched in, and even before those overjoyed peoples had voted unanimously in favor of joining the Soviet Union. Culling began with the officers. We must try to imagine what this first and last generation of native officers meant to these young states. They were not Baltic barons, not arrogant drones, but all that was most serious, most responsible, most energetic in these nations. While they were still schoolboys, they had learned in the snows of Narva to shield a still infant country with their still childish frames. Now all this rich experience was mowed down with one sweep of the scythe. This was a very important part of their preparations for plebiscite. The recipe was, of course, well tried. Had not the very same thing been done in the Soviet Union proper? Quietly and speedily destroyed those who might take the lead in resistance, and also those who might awaken resistance with their thoughts, their speeches, their books. And it will all seem that the people is whole and in place. Yet the people will be no more. Externally, a dead tooth looks for a while exactly like a live one. But for the Baltic states in 1940, it was not exile, but the camps, or for some people, death by shooting in stone-walled prison yards. In 1941 again, as the Soviet armies retreated, they seized as many well-to-do, influential, and prominent people as they could, and carried or drove them off like precious trophies, and then tipped them like dung onto the frost-bound soil of the archipelago. These arrests were invariably made at night. Only 100 kilograms of baggage was allowed for a whole family, and the heads of families were segregated as they boarded the train for imprisonment and destruction. Thereafter, the Baltic states were threatened over the Leningrad radio with ruthless punishment and vengeance throughout the war. When they returned in 1944, victors carried out their threats and imprisoned people in droves. But even this was not deportation of whole nations. The main epidemics of banishment hit the Baltic states in 1948, the recalcitrant Lithuanians in 1949, all three nations, and in 1951, the Lithuanians again. In these same years, the Western Ukraine too, which was being scraped clean, and there too the last deportations took place in 1951. When the Generalissimo, preparing to exile some national group in 1953, the Jews perhaps, and who else besides, perhaps the whole of the right bank Ukraine, we shall never know what his great scheme was. As a fact, for instance, that Stalin suffered from an unquenchable longing to exile all Finland into the wilderness of the Chinese border, but he had no luck, either in 1940 or in 1947. My dad is a Finn. Tough people. In Leno's attempted coup, he could not have found just a spot for the Serbs, say beyond the Urals, or for the Greeks of the Peloponnese. If this fourth pillar of the vanguard doctrine had stood another 10 years, we should not recognize the ethnic maps of Eurasia. There would have been a great counter-migration of the peoples. For every nation exiled, an epic will someday be written, only its separation from its native land and its destruction in Siberia. Only the nations themselves can voice their feelings, what all they have lived through. We have no words to speak for them, and we must not get under their feet. But to help the reader recognize that this is still the land of exile, which he has visited before, the same place of pollution adjoining the same archipelago, let us look a little further into the deportations of the Baltic peoples. The deportation of the Balts, far from being a violation of sovereign will of the people, was carried out purely and simply in execution of it. In each of the three republics, its very own Council of Ministers freely reached the decision. In Estonia, it was dated November 25, 1948, to deport certain specified categories of its fellow countrymen to distant and alien Siberia, and what is more, in perpetuity, never to return to their native land. In this we see distinctly both the independence of the Baltic governments and the exasperation to which their worthless and deplorable fellow countrymen had brought them. These categories were: A. The families of persons previously condemned. It was not enough that the fathers were perishing in prison camps. Their whole stock had to be extirpated. B. Prosperous peasants. This greatly speeded up the now essential process of collectivization in the Baltic states, and all members of their families, students in Riga and their parents on the farm, were picked up on the same night. C. People who were in any way conspicuous, important in their own right, yet had somehow jumped over the comb in 1940, 41, and 44. D. Families who were simply hostile to the regime, but had not been quick enough to escape to Scandinavia, or were personally disliked by local activists. Oh, so creepy. so as not to injure the dignity of our great common motherland and gratify our Western enemies. This decree was not published in the newspaper, was not promulgated in the republic, was revealed even to the exiles themselves, not at the moment of deportation, but only on arrival at MVD posts in Siberia. In the years which had passed since the deportation of the Koreans, or even that of the Crimean Tatars, the organization of such operations had improved to such a degree, the precious experience gained has been so widely spread and thoroughly assimilated that they no longer counted in days or even hours, but in minutes. Practice proved that 20 or 30 minutes was time enough between the first bang on the door at night and the last scrape of the householder's heel on the threshold as he walked into the darkness and toward the Lord. Those few minutes gave the awakened family time to dress, take in the news, and that they were being exiled for life, sign a document waiving all property claims, collect their old women and children, get their bundles together, and leave their homes when the order is given. Property left behind was dealt with in an orderly fashion after the escort troops had left. Representatives of the tax office arrived to draw up a list of confiscated items, which were then sold through commission shops for the benefit of the state. We have no right to reproach them if they stuffed some things under their coats and needed to do so. It was only necessary to get an extra receipt from the commission shop, and any representative of the people's power could quite legally carry home the article he had bought for a song. How could anyone think clearly in those 20 to 30 minutes? How could they decide what it would be most useful to take with them? The lieutenant who was evicting one family, a 75-year-old grandmother, a 50-year-old mother, and a daughter of 18, and a son of 20, advised to them, take your sewing machine, whatever you do. Who would have ever thought of it? But much later, that sewing machine fed the family, and without it they would have starved. Sometimes, however, the speed of the operation worked to the advantage of the victims. A whirlwind blew up and was gone. Even the best of broom leaves specks behind. If some woman managed to hang on for 3 days, spend the night away from home, then went to the tax office and asked them to unseal her apartment, well, sometimes they would. All right, damn you, live there till next time. In small cattle carts intended for the transport of 80 horses or 32 soldiers or 40 prisoners, they carried 50 or more exiled Taloners. They were in too much of a hurry to equip the cattle carts, and did not give immediate permission to hack holes in the floors. The old bucket in which the exiles relieved themselves was soon brimful, running over and splashing their belongings. From the first minute, these two-legged mammals were made to forget that men and women are different. They were shut up for a day and a half. Without food and without water, a child died. But of course, we read all this not so very long ago, didn't we? 2 chapters ago, 20 years back, but nothing has changed. I stood for a long time in the station at Julamista, with people running up and down outside, banging on the sides of cars, asking for friends and relatives by name, unsuccessfully trying to pass provisions and comforts to one or another of them. These people were chased away, while those locked in the boxcars went hungry, and Siberia awaited its lightly clad guests. The authorities began issuing bread on the journey, and at certain stations soup. All the trains had a long haul before them to the provinces of Novosibirsk, Irkutsk, and Krasnoyarsk. Barabinsk alone was the destination of 52 carloads of Estonians. Exiles to Achinsk were 14 days on the way. What can sustain people on such a desperate journey? The hope which is brought not by faith, but by hatred. Their end is near. There will be war this year, and we shall go home in the autumn. No one who has not experienced such misfortune, either in the Western or in the Eastern world, can be expected to understand or sympathize with, or perhaps even forgive the mood of those behind bars at that time. I have already said that we too had the same beliefs, the same yearnings in those years 1949, 50. These were the years in which the iniquity of the system, with its 25-year sentences and its return trips to the archipelago, reached a new explosive level, became so glaringly intolerable that its guardians could no longer defend it. Let us put it generally, if a regime is immoral, its subjects are free from all obligation to it. Only by savagely mutilating their lives could you make thousands of thousands in cells, in prison vans, and prison trains pray for a devastating atomic war as their only way out. But no one wept, no one. Hatred is dry-eyed. Another thing the Estonians thought about the journey was the reception they could expect from the people of Siberia. In 1940, the Siberians had stripped Exile Balts bare, bullied them into handing over their belongings, paid half a bucket of potatoes for a fur coat. We were, of course, all so ill-clad in those days that the Balts really did look like bourgeois. Now, in 1949, the word was put around in Siberia that those who were being brought were incorrigible kulaks, but these kulaks were dumped out of their cattle carts in rags and near the end of their endurance. At medical examinations, Russian nurses were amazed that the women were so thin and shabby that they hadn't a clean rag for their babes. The new arrivals were sent to kolkhozes short of people, and there the peasant women of collectivized Siberia, keeping it a secret from their bosses, brought them whatever they could spare, half a liter of milk from one, a griddle cake made of sugar beet pulp, or very bad flour from another. Now, at last, the Estonian women wept. Oh, I believe people suffered this. Thank you for listening. Have a good day.